You're listening to EdTech Heroes, a podcast that looks at how teachers in today's classrooms can use technology to improve student learning. In each episode, a hero in the world of education will share their story and discuss how innovation can influence the minds of the next generation. Let's jump in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to EdTech Heroes. I am your host, Neff, and today I'm excited to be joined by Sam Kary. Sam is the founder and CEO of New EdTech Classroom, but before that, Sam started his career in public education in 2010 as a Teach for America Corps member in Richmond, California, and continued teaching at Title I schools in the Bay Area for the next decade. Sam, welcome to EdTech Heroes.
Thanks so much for having me, Neff.
Yeah, of course. I actually did not know that you were a TFA alum until 30 seconds ago. What was that experience like, and how did that have an impact on the rest of your teaching career?
Yeah, it was an incredible experience. I returned to the Bay Area from graduate school in Ohio to do TFA. I was considered a non-traditional TFA member because I started it a little bit later. I was like in my late 20s. And I used it as a way to get my teaching credential. I knew that I wanted to stay in teaching. A lot of folks get into Teach for America and they use it as kind of a conduit for something else, but I wanted to get into teaching and I wanted to do it in the Bay Area. So it was an incredible entry into that world. It opened my eyes a lot to inequities that were going on in education. And I definitely did not know until I stepped into the classroom exactly what it was going to be like. But it was an amazing learning experience. I learned on the job over the course of my 3 years in TFA and really used it as, I think, a way to learn what not to do as much as what to do. And that's maybe unfortunate for the kids, that I had. It's tough, to kind of jump into the classroom, and TFA basically prepares you with like 5 weeks of training beforehand. And so you're really learning on the job. That's what I mean by kind of learning what not to do as much as learning what to do. But yeah, I think it really also helped establish for me the idea that my whole purpose in education, my whole purpose for becoming an educator was really about trying to give back, trying to do something positive, contribute in a positive way. If I was going to work, that I was going to do something that had a meaningful impact on the world. And it took me a while to learn how to do that correctly, or I should say, I should say.
Totally. And I think that's an important call out. I recently read a study that said that most teachers, regardless of what level of preparation they have, are not effective until year 5. So certainly not to say that 5 weeks of preparation is good enough by any stretch of the imagination for the enormity of teaching. But I do think that there's an important conversation to be had around how new teachers in lots of ways are always learning what to do, along with a pretty heavy dose of what not to do. So appreciate you calling that out and sort of talking through some of your beginning years in the classroom.
Yeah, for sure. I feel pretty strongly. I was just going to say that teaching is like a experiential thing. It's not something you learn just by sitting in a class and learning about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So we mentioned at the top that you are the founder of New EdTech Classroom. And if you've been listening to this podcast from the beginning, we had your partnering crime and creative director, Tom Gibson, on about a year ago. That was all the way in November 2021. I would recommend that people should go back and listen to that episode, but I have no idea how terrible it was. It probably was like our 5th or 6th episode, so it might be cringy to get through. But Tom is awesome. So if you are able to somehow mute my portions of that episode and go listen to Tom, then you should definitely check it out. I do want to go back and rehash one of the things that Tom said during that episode that I think was incredibly revelatory. And I'm going to quote him for a second. He said, "You don't have to be a pro, but you have to come in with a learner spirit and attitude and just believe that you can learn these things." And he was sort of saying that in reference to teachers taking on learning and implementing new technology in their classrooms. And I think that quotation sets us up a little bit for what I want to talk about next, which is y'all's brand new 21st century teacher scorecard, which is meant to help educators kind of understand where they are right now in their technology integration skills and lots of other things. There are tons of different ways that you guys are scoring folks, and then how they can move forward with that. So, can you talk to me a little bit about the 21st century teacher scorecard?
Sure. So I do want to highlight what Tom said. I also think that that is actually the most important thing to kind of hold on to, that what makes for an innovative teacher is not your ability to use technology. It's actually whether you have a learner's mindset. That's something that George Koros and Katie Novak write about as well, and Innovate Inside the Box, that we very much believe that really to be a great teacher means to be a great learner. If you are open to learning, then you will be a great teacher. And really, we created the scorecard as a way to just clearly articulate to teachers the skills that they need to develop in order to reach today's students, to reach students in the 21st century. We found that there are lots of different frameworks for teaching students 21st century skills, or what a teacher needs to do with students, but not a lot of frameworks that are describing how the teacher is actually going to figure out how to do that. So we've been racking our brains for a long time thinking about this. We've identified that really the primary goal of technology integration, of I think teaching now in general, should be to implement universal design for learning. So to figure out how we can create lessons that are as open and accessible for as many students as possible, lessons that are meaningful, relevant, and authentic for as many students as possible, and that technology can really help us unlock this. The problem with universal design for learning, though, is that if you look at the framework, it's quite difficult to kind of even know where do you start and how do you do all that stuff. Like, how do you actually offer students choice, and how do you pass ownership over to students? It's easy to kind of say, yeah, you should do that, but how, right? Then there are other frameworks like TPACK that do really categorize all the skills that teachers need to develop. But a framework like TPACK it's non-descriptive. So it doesn't say, it says you need to develop technological pedagogical knowledge. You need to learn how you use technology to implement instructional strategies, but it doesn't say what instructional strategies. So what we've done is really bring those together to say, we want teachers to be developing their ability to use technology to help amplify agency in the classroom, for example. So we're trying to bring together the two models to really articulate with what we've come up with as 7 core competencies that teachers would need to develop in order to become a 21st century teacher.
Totally. And I like this idea of thinking about it beyond what is pie in the sky and what we ought to be doing, and a little bit more to what is pragmatic and how we operationalize that in the classroom. Right before you got on, I took the quiz to start off to see where I scored. And I tried to be fairly true to who I was as an educator. So in some instances, it's like, I know what the right answer might be, what I should be doing, but I'm like, did I really do that for the students that I served? And what's interesting is I think I scored a 51%. And if I remember correctly, 70% is about the goal. Is that correct?
Yeah. To be
Okay,
in the
cool.
range of like, you're doing a pretty good job.
Totally. And let's talk about that, right? Because I do think that there are some listeners who might think about it a little bit like me. They leave this episode, they go take the quiz, and then they say, you know what? I'm at a 50%, I'm at a 20%. What is the next step there? How should we react to these results? And what is the point of understanding where we sit?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, the point, although we do give you a holistic score where you have kind of an overall percentage, we also break it down, right? So you have a score in each of the different categories. And really, the purpose is to help show folks that there are likely things that you're already implementing. There are categories that you're already doing well. And we strongly believe, and it's not just us, like the evidence shows that if teachers develop skills in just one area, that's actually going to impact the others, and it can have a significant impact. So just to give an example, if you were to develop your skills and your ability to magnify meaning, to really highlight the importance of what you're teaching, to start implementing or teaching with essential questions, for example, that is going to bleed into everything that you do. If you start to make sure that everything you're doing is intentional, then you're going to make sure that you're using technology intentionally. You're going to have students show their understanding about whatever essential question it is that they're working on. And that gets into elevating experience and having them show understanding through experiential learning. So we're not trying to say that you necessarily need to implement all of them. Like if I took the quiz right now and I was honest, there's no way I would score 100%. I did not do all of the things that we have identified in the quiz. It's more to help teachers understand this is a target area where I could develop some skills. So you could either choose to build upon something that you're already doing well and kind of accelerate in that area, or notice, wait a second, there's kind of a whole category that I haven't really touched that maybe I want to think about. And so part of it is also just drawing attention to that. So the actual act of taking the quiz would make you think like, do I do that? Well, maybe I do want to learn how to do that. Maybe I should do that. And that act of self-awareness is an important part of being an ongoing learner. So that's really the purpose of it, to help people become aware of the skills that they can develop, as opposed to like a punitive thing. And then, as far as next steps, we have designed our whole program, 21st Century Teacher Academy, to be about developing these skills. So that's what I would recommend, to be honest. And even if you take the quiz, we will send you resources about how you can implement each of these skills or how you can build skills in each of the categories. But we do have a program as well that is based around experiential learning for teachers. So you're actually learning by doing in order to build skills in each of these categories.
Very cool. It certainly felt like an experience that required a lot of reflection on my part. I think one of the questions that stands out to me was, who is doing the most talking during parent-teacher-student conversations? And you're confronted with three different options. Is it you as the teacher? Is it the parent who is doing the questioning and sort of leading that? Or is it the student who is talking a little bit more about their work, about their position in the class? And as I'm reflecting on probably the hundreds of parent-teacher-student conversations I've had, I am the one leading the conversation. And then I get my scorecard back. And one of the things that I am ranked as a beginner in is this idea of amplifying agency, right? So I could think that if I were to go back and I was still in the classroom, one of the things that I could very pragmatically do is think through that, right? So like, if I'm in my next parent-teacher-student conference, how do I give more opportunities for students to be able to share their voice, to be able to talk about their learning experiences? And there are tons of other questions and activities that are a part of that will kind of map to that amplify agency part. But I do love that you have lots and lots of different ways to be able to build on what you learn about yourself through taking that quiz, whether it's looking at the resources that you get via email or going headfirst into the 21st Century Academy to see what that is like. So that's really, really cool. An awesome experience to be able to reflect on who you are as an educator.
I will say that you're not alone. Actually, the lowest, we've had about 1,000 teachers take the quiz so far. It's been up now for about 2 weeks. And by far the lowest score overall is in Amplify Agency, which is interesting. I also think in order to do that well, that is one that does kind of come after some of the other ones. Like a student-led conference is probably not going to be what it could be unless you have already magnified meaning and really made sure that meaning is, or that learning is meaningful, that you have created these hands-on experiential learning experiences for students so that they have something to talk about in a student-led conference, that you have curated curriculum and pulled together material to make sure that the learning is relevant, that you've reduced barriers to learning. Those are all other categories in the scorecard. And so I think it makes sense that folks in general might be scoring a little bit lower in Amplify Agency, because in some ways, a student-led conference that is done well, where a student is legitimately able to demonstrate metacognition by reflecting on their learning, it actually demands that you've had all those other pieces in place. And yeah, if you're interested in learning about student-led conferences, we have free resources that we'll send out to you. And actually, in that guide that you're going to get soon enough, we have a whole step-by-step process for how you can implement them. And I think it's one of the most powerful things that teachers can do to really start to shift the whole dynamic in their classroom, because students start to understand that what they're doing is meaningful. And it's not just about that end conference either. It's a whole process of really understanding and helping students understand what it means to be a learner, helping them to set meaningful goals, but not just dropping that, which I did for a long time. And I know a lot of teachers do. Like, we set goals like the first 2 weeks, and then like, where did those goals go? But instead, to track progress, have students track their own progress, report on that progress on a regular basis, and really take ownership of their own learning.
Sure. And are there other trends that you all have noticed with 1,000 replies in 2 weeks? What are some where teachers are consistently scoring a bit higher than average? And are there others like Amplify Agency where teachers are consistently struggling a little bit?
Yeah, so the other one that teachers are struggling in is Elevate Experience. And that makes sense to me as well, because that is something that I think is, particularly the way that we're asking the questions, is really about whether or not you are kind of implementing constructivist principles, whether or not you're giving students the opportunity to explore before you explain, to do some real kind of schema building on their own. And I think we've been so conditioned to pre-teach and to do direct instruction before giving students any kind of opportunity to be confused and get in there and do hands-on learning. So that's an aspect of elevating experience. And then to also basically be implementing project-based learning. And obviously our angle on it is project-based learning using technology. So you're having students show their understanding through creating with technology. And I think those are understandably more advanced skills for teachers to develop. They require a lot more skill building on the part of a teacher to be able to have students, say, create a video skit, or to start blogging, or post, create a website or something like that. And requires a lot more risk as well on the part of a teacher. So that makes sense. And the two that teachers are really scoring, well, there's one that teachers are like far and away scoring higher in, and that's the category of curating curriculum. And really that's about pulling in supplemental resources to make sure that you're providing students with resources that are relevant and authentic to their lives. And that makes sense to me too, that teachers have been doing that for a while. Teachers are not just teaching out of the textbook. I think that's become pretty custom. We're not against textbooks. It's just we treat a textbook like another resource. It's one resource, and there are lots of resources out there that you can use. The other that did surprise me, actually, that teachers are scored fairly high in, is teach technology. We specifically say teach technology as opposed to teach with technology, because I actually think that some of the discourse around technology integration that happens in the community can sometimes, I think, be potentially, I don't want to say harmful, but it can potentially lead to this idea that it's only the teacher who is learning how to choose and use tools, that technology is just a tool we use to accomplish instructional goals. Yes, but we also need to be teaching students how to choose and use technology as well. So we're firm believers in really the need to have a collective effort to build foundational technology skills in students to truly close the digital divide. So that means it's kind of all hands on deck, helping students learn how to use the different applications that they're learning how to use. And teachers scored pretty well overall in that category too. And I was a little bit surprised by that, because that's something that I don't think has been emphasized that much. But I think teachers are recognizing that you can't use technology unless you also proactively teach students how to do it. Otherwise, it just becomes this massive barrier to learning.
That's a really interesting distinction between, are we using technology or are we teaching it? And I'll put myself on blast here. This was one of the ones where I actually was a beginner. And I think it is because I often made assumptions around technology, right? So one thing might be to say, hey, I want you to create a Google Slides presentation that demonstrates your understanding of a particular principle. And that is certainly something that I might have done in my classroom. But I think in order to score pretty high on this principle, I would have needed to first take a step back and sort of think through, okay, what are some of the unique ways that students might be able to use Google Slides? What does that look like? Is there a student in the classroom who is a Google Slides expert who might be able to help all of us level up our proficiency of the tool? So I think that's a really interesting one. And I think it is emblematic of some of the very subtle nuances that you all are making as part of this scorecard, right? A lot of us are sort of on the precipice of doing what we might need to do. But if we sort of just like reframed it a little bit more, did something slightly differently, then we are even closer to a best practice. Do you think that's true? Am I getting it here in terms of what you guys have created?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think that there are lots of things. We're not suggesting that people need to throw everything out and completely reinvent everything necessarily about their practice. I think that lots of folks are close. Like you said, there are lots of teachers that do things like Google Slides, for example. For teachers that are using Google Slides, I would suggest that that's great. Teach students how to use Google Slides, and then think about how you might increase the rigor of something like teaching students how to use Google Slides. So to give an example, if you typically just push out a template for students, which is something that I used to do, then the next time you do a Google Slides project, have them watch a tutorial about how they set up their own template in Google Slides, or show them where to find pre-created templates for Google Slides, so that we're kind of eliminating some of those scaffolds and really passing the ownership over to them. And then once we've kind of established, okay, we've learned how to use Google Slides, which I kind of think is a little bit of an overused tool, to be honest. I mean, it's like a presentation tool that does have some functionality, but that's not the primary way that people in the real world are using technology to summarize their learning or showcase what they've learned or communicate with others. And so I would also encourage people, once you have established that, you've learned how to do that, you've taught students how to do that, that let's look to other ways that we can have students show their understanding later in the year. Then you can offer all of those as different choices that students can choose from. But we're also big proponents of really specifically, in some ways, and this kind of contradicts some of what universal design for learning would suggest around like always giving choices. I do actually believe you need to teach students how to use these different tools kind of in isolation as well. So yes, let's teach them Google Slides, and then let's teach them video, and then let's teach them graphic design. And once you've done all that, then you can like put that on a choice board. But I'd hate to see like the Google Slide expert student only doing Google Slides the entire year and never learning how to do that other stuff because it's outside of their comfort zone, for example.
Certainly. Yeah, that makes sense. It almost feels like what you're advocating is that, yes, we give students choices, but we also put them in the position where they can make an informed choice, right? So if you gave them those choices without first teaching those tools in isolation, then to your point, that student that is a Google Slides expert is always going to choose Google Slides. It's the thing that they know. It is right in their comfort zone. But if we give them that opportunity to become proficient on lots of different tools and lots of different things, then it's kind of a fair shot for them to pick any of those three, because perhaps they feel about the same level of comfort, even if there might still be a slight preference for Google Slides. So I certainly like that call out in terms of how we might be able to modify that so that students are more likely to make choices that are outside of what they know.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, when we think in a more global scale about what does it mean to learn how to use technology. It's not about learning how to use one particular application. It's building skills to be flexible, to be able to adapt to different applications. Because the reality is, when students today grow up, who knows, Google Slides might be completely obsolete. So it's not about one program. And I do think it is largely our responsibility to ask students to take those risks, to create a safe environment for them to take risks, try different things, to learn the skill of flexibility. That's really the skill that they need to develop, because we don't know what specific application or format they're going to use. There could be totally new technologies, but if they have that confidence that when they're confronted with something new, they have the skills to be able to tackle it and work through it and learn how to use it, those are going to be the skills that help people thrive in the future of work.
Totally, totally. And I'm really glad that you brought that up as being a skill that is of paramount performance. And I agree with you quite a bit. I know one of the other things that you've talked about, and I think as recently as a video from a couple of weeks ago, is creativity and why that also is so important for students. Let's talk about that just sort of in the macro sense. Why is creativity on that list of skills that are so important along with things like flexibility?
Well, very similar to flexibility, if again, on a very macro level, if we're talking about automation and machine learning and things like that, creativity is a skill that is not easily automated. So if we're talking about skills that are going to help people thrive in the future, being able to come up with a novel solution to a problem, to apply what you've learned in one situation to something that seems to be completely different, those are going to be skills that are going to be in high demand. So there's a need for creative problem solving. Clearly, we have lots of problems that need creative solutions. So we need creative folks in the world. I also think that just on a personal level, once you unlock this understanding that creativity is just a skill like any other that can be cultivated, that it's really liberating and can open up so many things for a person on a personal level, really creates a lot of opportunities. So I think the extent to which we can help students kind of break out of what has unfortunately become a mindset that's so common that creativity is just something that is innate and inherent and something you're born with, but that instead it's something that can be cultivated like anything else. I think then we're really giving students something special if we can help them see that.
That makes a lot of sense. And certainly when we talk about our job as educators being to prepare students for what the future will be, it makes even more sense. But I kind of want to speak a little bit more about one of the things that you said around creativity being something that we can cultivate and not necessarily just being a birthright. That is something that I think is very interesting, right? Especially when we think about how we define creativity. I think for so long, we thought of creativity as sort of these things that do feel almost like birthrights, right? Like, can I draw really well? Can I sing really well? Can I do some of these things that maybe are slightly harder to be able to learn how to do? Although one certainly can learn how to draw well, you certainly can learn how to sing well. But to take that one step further, I'm curious to hear how you define creativity and how might that be different than some of these more commonplace definitions.
Yeah, you're referring to kind of creativity being typically defined as artwork, essentially. I do want to say that I do also believe that basically any skill can be cultivated. So if you really want to be a great drawer, you can. It might just so
Totally.
happen that somebody might have more talent, in drawing, but I do believe that if anybody decided they wanted to learn how to draw, they could, or paint or sing, anything like that. My definition of creativity is more expansive beyond art. And it's not my definition alone. It's just essentially coming up with a novel solution to a problem, or just to be able to apply learning from one discipline to another. So when
Okay.
you can kind of make connections between things that appear to not be connected, that is creative thinking. And that's typically where creative solutions come to be. So that's how most of the inventions in the world are essentially creative solutions. To give an example of something like Uber, right, which is maybe not the greatest social example, but you take something that we think of as just out there physically in the world. It's a car, it's a taxi that people drive around. Well, what does Uber do? They figure out how to digitize it, how to turn that into an app. That's taking two things that seem to have no connection, bringing them together. That obviously involves creative thinking. So that, I think, is a more expansive definition of what creativity is. Really, I mean, when you're drawing, when you're painting, what you're doing is you're expressing an idea, like, say, an emotion, in a different medium, right? So it's the same idea. It's just expanding it beyond the sort of traditional realm of drawing, painting, singing, things like that.
Totally, totally. And that definition makes a lot of sense. I think Uber's a great example, right? Certainly we can talk about the societal implications of the app, but just in terms of the idea, I think it is a pretty textbook example of learning what has worked in other industries and then applying it somewhere else to come up with a pretty novel solution. So I think a lot of time in the classroom, we have some way in which we like to give students a creative outlet. But I would also say that we want to move beyond that and give students an opportunity to think of creative solutions to problems. So what are some ways in which teachers might be able to sort of showcase the creativity of students and to be able to cultivate it?
Yeah, I think what we should often be thinking about, or what we should be thinking about when we're teaching, is how can we break up a complex process into smaller pieces? How can we chunk it up? How can we essentially create routines, ways for students to practice this? So if you have a student show their understanding in some kind of summative assessment through a quiz, that is not necessarily asking students to apply what they've learned in any kind of novel situation, right? It's essentially a type of recall. So to ask a student to apply what they've learned in a different medium, that requires them to really think about, okay, how do I want to summarize key points here? How do I want to present this information? That is practicing the act of creativity. Are they actually solving big, huge problems, right, in that moment? I mean, maybe not necessarily. Like, this could be that they are actually just showing what they've learned about some historical period, and they're doing that in a novel and creative way. I don't think it always has to be about solving big problems or anything like that, as long as it is practicing this skill of applying something that you've learned and really having to make sense of it in order to produce something new. And you cannot produce that new thing unless you have made sense of the information. So I think that's a way that teachers can create structures just to help kind of almost routinize creativity in the classroom, just to build that skill, if that makes sense. So things like having students show their understanding by making videos, by creating a podcast, doing a podcast interview, by putting up a blog, making a graphic design. Again, although those might not have some kind of immediate like impact in the world, like creating an app like Uber, I don't believe that students always need to be inventing something, or, even necessarily always dealing with real world problems, which, I think is important, but I don't think has to be all the time. I think those practices that I named will help students build those skills and eventually be able to, apply or come up with solutions, novel solutions to real world problems.
Certainly, certainly. It gives students an opportunity to do it in a fairly low stakes way and to build that brain muscle and that capacity to be able to think about small problems in creative ways and then eventually be able to apply what they've learned in those situations into solving real world problems and things of that nature. And that's creativity too, right? Being able to understand how a solution to one problem might also be a solution to another problem. So totally that makes sense to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just the act of having to depict something that you've learned through a picture, for example, That's a problem, right? It's a very small problem, but it's
Mhm.
just you have to think through, how am I going to take this abstract concept and create a graphic design out of it to show my learning? That's a non-traditional way of applying what you've learned instead of just selecting a multiple choice question. That is applying creativity. It's a way we can start to routinize and practice that in the classroom. Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. I certainly like that as an opportunity to get students to start thinking more creativity. Well, I guess you don't think creativity, but think creatively.
That's a way that kids are already super creative, right? Just coming up with their own language.
Very true. Very true. So before we wrap up our discussion, we have a segment here where we ask every single one of our heroes to share some tips and advice for teachers. You are an avid video creator. And for those of you who are watching the podcast on video, you see how awesome Sam's background is, complete with a little YouTube plaque over there to talk about, or I guess to display how great your videos have been. So, since that is something that you uniquely excel at, we wanted to make sure that we asked you a little bit about that. What are 2 or 3 of your favorite tips to share with educators who are looking to create great videos in their own right?
Well, I have to say these come directly from my co-founder and president of New EdTech Classroom, Tom Gibson. I learned pretty much everything about video from him. Audio is essential, so you can have actually a not so great visual setup, but if you have high quality audio, then your production is going to be a lot better. So what we recommend to teachers actually who are not necessarily going to like purchase a nice camera and have no need to do that, if you do invest in a very affordable, even $20 microphone, that's going to significantly increase the production value and watchability of your videos. So that's one thing. The other is just to look into the camera. So I've been trying my best to look into the camera rather than looking at the computer, looking at the person. This is kind of weird, and it took me a long time to get used to that and figure out how to do that. But that also just increases watchability. It helps you feel when you're watching a video like you're making a connection with a person as opposed to having the person look off screen. And the other is to focus on lighting before, say, like a camera upgrade. So if you have good lighting and you are making sure you have some nice light on your face that's also kind of separating you from the background, that can help increase the look of your video. But I'd say that's less important than the audio and just looking into the camera, which are also skills we can teach students, particularly looking into the camera.
For sure. And I guess talking about creative solutions, I think I saw on TikTok maybe where I learn all of my important things these days. But somebody has actually invented a camera that sits sort of in the middle of your screen to correct this problem of people wanting to be able to simultaneously look at the person that they're talking to and also deliver some of that eye contact. Not endorsing the product, haven't tried it myself, but it is interesting to think about how important that is and some of the creative solutions that folks have had for it. So I think you're totally right in terms of being able to teach students to look at the camera and that being a $0 solution to allowing them to create better videos. But some of your other tips around having a microphone, better lighting might be slightly harder things to be able to make possible for our students. Is there a tip or two that you can share for students to be able to create better videos?
Yeah, practice. So professionals are not creating videos just off the top of their heads. And that is where it actually becomes a legitimate skill to be teaching students. You have to write out a script or at least bullet point out key ideas. You should rehearse what you want to say before you film. No YouTuber that students are watching, even if they're doing something live, none of them are doing that completely extemporaneously. They have a plan for what they're going to do, and that requires a lot of thinking, preparation, planning. It's always the planning that takes the large amount of time. It's not the actual creation of the video itself. So if we can teach students how to do that. When they're using an application like Screencastify, they're going to say, make a screencast video that explains their digital portfolio, which I think is like one of the top things that they can do to amplify agency. Have them practice that first, rehearse what they want to say, then record. It's going to be so much higher quality, so much more watchable. Nobody wants to watch a super long video where somebody's kind of stumbling through it. And if students can build that skill, wow, I mean, they really have an advantage that can help them later in their lives. And it's something students want to learn too. The number of students that report that they want to become YouTubers and stuff like that is, I think, higher than anything else. Or maybe now it's TikTokers, but you know what I mean? So they want to learn it, and it's a skill that is becoming increasingly more important. So we should teach it.
Totally, totally. I think the emergence of creators like Mr. Beast has certainly increased the number of folks who would love to be able to do that in the future. And absolutely no way that he's going in to create the awesome videos that he does without being able to practice it, without a strong script. So I think that there's a very compelling reason to help our students be able to understand how to create the best videos possible for that platform, TikTok, whatever it is that they might want to engage with. Some of those principles are going to be the same.
That's a great example, to bring videos of Mr. Beast talking about his process. First of all, he took years and years and created hundreds of videos before he ever became famous, and worked really, really hard to perfect his practice. And if you listen to him now talk about his process of making videos, I mean, everything down to the very minute details of his thumbnails are all meticulously planned. So kids know who he is. It'd be great to bring that in as an example and show the kind of all the background work that goes into it.
Very cool. Very cool. So, final question before we go, and you've kind of already started to answer it, but what are some of your favorite online resources that you love to share with other educators? And what should we expect from New EdTech Classroom in the future in terms of resources, opportunities, other things? Can you give us any sneak peeks?
Sure. So I'm going to kind of sidestep the question because we have so many resources, and actually we have compiled them onto subject-specific choice boards that we also give folks for free once you take the quiz. So you can find the quiz that we were referring to at newedtechclassroom.com/quiz. One of the skills is about curating curriculum. We don't believe that a teacher should be responsible to go out and find all those resources. So we have compiled virtual reality, augmented reality, video, audio, images, text-based resources, websites for all the subjects. And you can get those choice boards for free as part of our quick start guide that we'll send you after you take the quiz to help you start to build these skills. So there are lots of great resources out there, and we've put them all together, and we want teachers to have them and start to use them. So take the quiz and you can get that for free. And as far as what's next for us, we are really working on building out 21st Century Teacher Academy. We're rolling out with a new version of it. It's going to be coming out within hopefully a week or two. And we are building out lots of our course offerings. So we do have our flagship course, 21st Century Teacher, which is our certification course, but now we're also building out lots of other courses. These are all experiential, hands-on learning courses where, for example, rather than just teaching you how to use Screencastify, I'm creating a interactive video in Screencastify that's teaching you about some of the core principles of creating interactive content, and then you have to go make your own interactive Screencastify video, things like that. So you're really actually learning by doing. And we're creating lots of courses. One that I'm really excited about is called Build a Second Teacher Brain. And it's also something I'm going to be presenting about at FETC this year as a way to really leverage technology to store your information, to capture information so that we don't have to spend so much time planning lessons. So really excited about that course. And we have several other courses that we're going to be releasing in 2023 as part of our academy. You can find all that information at www.21cta.com and also on newedtechclassroom.com.
Cool. And we'll throw both of those into the show notes for teachers who would like to be able to access those resources and sign up for those courses in 2023. and the courses that already exist right now today that you can get your hands on. Sam, I really appreciate you joining EdTech Heroes. Listeners, be sure to connect with Sam on Twitter at New EdTech Classroom. Thank you so much for listening. I am your host, Neff Dukes, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of EdTech Heroes, presented by Screencastify.